Snow fell in a heavy, silent blanket as 15-year-old Claire stepped inside her family's new home. The Victorian house, sitting at the edge of a quiet forest, felt worlds away from the city she had known her whole life. Her parents had described the move as a fresh start, but Claire saw it differently. It was a desperate attempt to fix things that were beyond repair. The house creaked and groaned with age, its wooden floors warped and its windows covered in frost. While her parents unpacked downstairs, Claire wandered up to find a room for herself. She chose the smallest one at the end of the hall, its walls covered in faded wallpaper decorated with snowflakes and sleds. As she set her suitcase down, a chill breeze swept through the room. Her gaze caught something unusual, a small hatch in the ceiling, slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued. Claire dragged a chair beneath the hatch, climbed up, and pushed it open. The attic was dark and musty, filled with a faint smell of mildew. Among the forgotten boxes and cobwebs, something caught her eye, a small, leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age. A diary. Back in her room, Claire sat on the bed and opened the diary. The handwriting was rushed, spidery, as if written in haste. She flipped to the first entry. December 12th, 1902 Il est venu hier soir. J'ai entendu les cloches d'abord, fables, mais de plus en plus fortes. La neige était rouge, si en était pas seulement du sang, mais elle fumait comme si la terre elle-même avait froid. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she translated. He came last night. I heard the bells first. Faint, but growing louder. The snow was red, it wasn't just blood, but it steamed, as if the earth itself was freezing. The words painted a grotesque scene in her mind, snow-stained crimson, steam rising into the air like ghostly tendrils. A shiver ran down her spine as she slammed the diary shut. That night, sleep eluded her. The diary sat on her nightstand, and her mind replayed the words over and over.
Snow. Bells. Red.
Just as her eyes began to close, a faint sound reached her ears. She froze, straining to listen. Jingling. At first, it was soft, like the sound of distant wind chimes, but it grew louder. Her chest tightened as the noise grew nearer, winding through the night air until it echoed just outside her window. Throwing off the covers, Claire crept to the frosted window and peered out. Nothing. Then, she saw them. Hoof prints in the snow, leading from the forest to the house. The next morning, Claire mentioned it to her parents, but they dismissed it. It's probably just deer, her father said with a wave of his hand. But the hoof prints remained, clear and sharp in the fresh snow. That evening, Claire turned back to the diary, flipping to another entry. December 13th, 1902, Les Cloches encore. Pair of Verawil les ports, mais cela n'a pas d'importance. Il était déjà à Eleanor. Claire's pulse quickened. The bells again. Father locked the doors, but it didn't matter. He was already inside. Her stomach churned as she read on. The entries grew darker, describing a creature with burning eyes and horns that scraped the ceiling. That night, the bells returned, louder this time. Their sound was sharp, deliberate, as if calling to her. The air in her room grew frigid, and frost began to creep along the window panes. Claire hugged her knees, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. A loud creak broke the silence. Her bedroom door was opening. Claire's heart raced as she dove under the bed, clutching the diary to her chest. The room grew colder still, and the sound of heavy footsteps filled the air. Peering through the shadows, she saw them. Clawed hooves stepping across the floor, leaving a trail of snow and ice. A guttural growl filled the room, and the bells jingled once more, deafeningly loud. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream as a long, bony hand with razor-sharp claws slid across the floor, searching. As tu étais sage, petite fille? The voice was deep and gravelly, the French words dripping with malice. Have you been good, little girl? Tears streamed down Claire's face as she tried to remain silent. The creature's glowing red eyes pierced the darkness, scanning the room. The bed above her groaned, as if it were impossibly heavy. Suddenly, The diary slipped from her trembling hands and hit the floor with a hollow thud. The creature froze. With a roar, the bed was thrown across the room, crashing into the wall. Claire scrambled backward, but the creature loomed over her, its massive horns scraping the ceiling. Its grin revealed jagged teeth, and its blackened tongue flicked out like a serpent's. The sack on its back writhed and squirmed, faint cries escaping from within. "Please," Claire whispered, her voice barely a sound. The creature tilted its head, studying her. Its eyes gleamed as it leaned closer, its rancid breath filling the air. "You've been good, haven't you?" it rasped. Claire nodded frantically, unable to speak. The creature's grin widened, its jagged teeth gleaming in the pale moonlight. "A bientôt," it hissed, the words chilling her to the core. "See you soon." Claire awoke with a start, drenched in sweat. The diary sat untouched on her nightstand, as though it had never been opened. "I work at a Cold Stone Creamery, and have been there for just over a month. Since I started, I've noticed something odd that happens consistently during my opening shifts. It's always at 11 a.m., right when I open the store for customers. Let me give you some context first. I handle the opening shift, arriving at 10 a.m. to prepare the store for its 11 a.m. opening. I'm on my own until the midday staffer comes in at 3 p.m. Mornings are slow. Ice cream isn't exactly a breakfast item. During that time, I set up, take inventory, and make ice cream. By 10:40 or 10:45 a.m., I've usually finished setting up the tables, both inside and outside, and prep the stone where the chopping and folding happens. Then, at exactly 11 a.m., the phone rings. The caller ID is always strange, just a string of pound, #signs. I answer with my usual, "Thank you for calling Cold Stone Creamery. How can I help you?" What happens next depends on the day of the week. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I hear a man screaming. On Mondays, my own voice repeats my greeting back to me. The other weekdays, there's nothing but silence. I count down in my head, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then hang up. After that, the phone doesn't ring again for the rest of the day. This has been happening since my very first solo opening shift. Last week marked my first full month at the job, and that's when my routine took a strange turn. On Wednesday, everything started as usual. I got the silent phone call at 11 a.m., counted down, hung up, and moved on. But just as I set the phone back on the receiver, I heard a loud crash coming from the walk-in freezer. Annoyed, I thought, great, now I have to freeze my ass off cleaning up ice cream because someone couldn't stack containers properly. I grabbed my jacket and checked the security monitor to confirm no one had entered the store before heading to the freezer. When I stepped inside, the cold hit me differently. It wasn't just chilly, it was bone-numbingly cold, the kind that steals your breath. Worse, the lights were off. Propping the door open with my foot, I searched for the switch, but there wasn't one in sight. Another thing to bug my boss about. Fantastic. Before I could leave, I felt something warm against my cheek, like someone exhaling on their hands to warm them up. A breathy "hawa" sound accompanied it, and fear prickled at the back of my neck. I was certain I was alone in the store. No one had come through the front door. That fear froze me in place. Finally, I managed to stammer, "Stop." That small act broke the spell, and I pushed the door fully open before bolting out of the freezer. Without looking back, I slammed the door shut as hard as I could. "What the actual fuck?" I whispered, staring at the freezer door. I didn't know what to do, except try to convince myself it was nothing. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I'd spooked myself in the dark. Determined to prove it, I opened the freezer door again. Everything was back to normal. The lights were on, and nothing was out of place. I let out a shaky sigh of relief. Since then, the freezer blackouts have continued, but now I hear random clicking sounds whenever it happens. Strangely, the events always follow that eerie phone call. It's no longer the sound of crashing. Instead, I find myself needing to go into the freezer at the same time every day. I haven't told anyone at work about the blackouts. So far, they don't seem to affect the ice cream or the equipment. Still, it's unsettling. If anything new happens, I'll be sure to update. When I got the job, I thought I had struck gold. A remote village, a cozy cottage, and a simple task. Watch the sheep and follow a few rules. The old man who hired me seemed on edge when he handed me the list, his gaze avoiding mine. I chalked it up to typical caution with newcomers. How difficult could herding sheep be? But when I first arrived, something about the village felt off, though I couldn't quite place why. The roads were empty, the houses worn and quiet, like they were waiting for something. What unsettled me most was the silence. No children playing, no friendly chatter between neighbors, just an unnatural stillness. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth, though there hadn't been rain in days. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the isolation. After all, this part of the country wasn't exactly crowded. But the villagers, they watched me. Not in a welcoming way, but with eyes that seemed to look right through me. They gave directions without any emotion, like they already knew why I was there, or perhaps even what would happen next. It wasn't until the old man, trembling slightly, handed me the list of rules that a chill settled in my stomach. He barely said a word as he pressed it into my hands, his shaking hands avoiding mine. He didn't look at me until after I took the paper. Then, he looked up long enough to say one thing: "Follow them, or you won't last." At the time, I figured it was just superstition. But after a few hours, I wasn't so sure anymore. Here are the rules. Rules for herding the village sheep. Rule 1. Never lose sight of the herd. If they run off, you'll be punished. Rule 2. Always check for extra sheep in your herd. We don't want to upset the neighboring village for stealing theirs. Rule 3. Keep them away from the river. Every year, we lose a few there. Rule 4. Return to the village by nightfall. You don't want to see what happens in the dark. Rule 5. If the sheep start circling a tree, run and don't look back. Rule 6. Wolves might attack you or the sheep. You must protect them at all costs. Once they start, they won't stop with just the sheep. Rule 7. Only white sheep live in the village. If you see a black sheep, danger is near. If you don't separate it from the herd before nightfall, you won't make it back to the village. Rule 8. If a group of children follows you on the road, in the field, or through the woods, don't make eye contact, don't speak to them. If they realize you can see them, you'll become one of them. Rule 9. If you hear a beautiful song while walking through the woods and spot a girl in a white dress, she will try to lure you off the path. Don't give in. Keep walking. She's a witch, and if you wander off the path, her interest in you is not the kind you want. Rule 10. If you're not back at the village by nightfall, stay calm. Panicking won't help. Keep your focus on the sheep. If the sheep refuse to move, no matter how loud you yell or how hard you hit them, get into the middle of the herd immediately. Once there, lie on the ground and don't move until morning. Some sheep will be missing when you wake up, but hurry back to the village. You don't want them to come back for you. If the sheep head toward a lone house in the field and the lights are on, don't go inside. Hide and don't let them see you. If the lights are off, you can stay the night, but head straight to the village priest at dawn. He will know what to do. If they make their way to the old graveyard and you see people dancing around the graves, pray they don't spot you. Once they do, you can't hide. If the graveyard is empty, you can sleep there if you can manage to fall asleep. As I read through the rules, a cold shiver ran down my spine. They were strange, almost like something from a folk tale. But there was no mistaking the urgency in the old man's voice, the tremor in his hands as he left me to my work. I tried to push the unease aside. Superstition, right? But as I headed out to herd the sheep the next morning, the village's eerie stillness pressed in on me like a weight I couldn't shake. The sheep were different too. They moved with an unnatural order, like they were being guided by something unseen. It wasn't long before I noticed the villagers' strange behavior. They'd peek out from behind their curtains and watch me. No smiles, no waves, just cold, unfeeling stares. It felt like I wasn't welcome, like I was being watched by eyes that knew more than I did. As evening approached, my sense of dread deepened. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the village. The sheep were growing restless, their bleating echoing in the silence, more erratic with every passing minute. I made my way back to the cottage, the path winding through the fields. Each step felt heavier, as if the very land was pulling me down. The quiet was suffocating. No birds, no rustling wind, just a deep, unsettling stillness. It was as if the village had fallen asleep before night even truly arrived. I could see the lights of my cottage flickering in the distance, a small beacon in the growing dark. I quickened my pace, eager to get inside, away from the eyes of the villagers. But as I passed the houses, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Faces lingered behind curtained windows, eyes tracking my every movement. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me. The cold air had followed me in, wrapping around me like a shroud. I set the list of rules down on the table, my hands still trembling. I couldn't stop thinking about them, about how strange and ominous they felt. Sitting by the fire, I tried to distract myself with a book I found on the shelf. The crackling flames were the only sound, a small comfort against the silence closing in around me. But every so often, I'd glance up at the window, half expecting to see someone or something watching me. What unnerved me more, the villagers' cold gaze, or the growing sense of unease that seemed to hang over everything in the village. As the night wore on, the wind picked up outside, howling through the cracks in the walls. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the room. Eventually, exhaustion hit, and I tried to shake off the anxiety that had been building all day. I needed rest, a good sleep to clear my mind. But just as I was about to blow out the candle, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible scratching, like something or someone was outside the door. I held my breath, waiting, my skin crawling. The sound paused, then resumed, growing louder. It was coming from the window. Frozen. My heart hammered in my chest. What was it? Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. I didn't move, didn't dare look outside. I could feel the village's unseen eyes upon me, pressing in, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not here. Not in this cottage. Not in this village. The night dragged on, each minute feeling heavier than the last. I finally managed to fall into a restless sleep by the fire, but my mind raced. The wind howled outside, rattling the cottage's old windows. Occasionally, I thought I heard faint footsteps on the gravel, but when I checked, no one was there. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but the feeling wouldn't go away, an ever-present, gnawing sensation that I wasn't truly alone. Then a loud crash jolted me awake. My heart leaped into my throat. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of something scraping across the ground, like claws on stone. The firelight danced wildly in the corner, casting shadows that seemed to twist unnaturally. Shaking, I grabbed the lantern from the table, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. I moved toward the door, cautiously. The scratching continued, louder now, closer. Something or someone was trying to get in. I stood there, frozen. I reached for the handle, my palms sweating, my breath shallow. The air felt thick, heavy, like the walls were closing in. With a sharp exhale, I pulled the door open just a crack. Outside, the night was unnervingly still. The dark skies stretched out endlessly above, and the pale moonlight cast strange, elongated shadows on the ground. But then I saw something moving in the distance, near the edge of the field. A figure. At first, it was too far, too shrouded in darkness. But as I squinted, it became clear. A tall, hunched figure, its movements jerky and unnatural. A cold wave of dread washed over me. My heart pounded. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew I should close the door and never open it again. But my feet were frozen. Then the figure turned. But the relief was short-lived. As the sheep shifted restlessly, one caught my eye. At first, I thought it was merely a trick of the light, a shadow from a passing cloud. But as I took a step closer, my stomach churned. Its wool was black. Not just gray or dirty, but a deep, unnatural black that seemed to draw in the light around it. The sheep stood motionless, separated from the others, its head low. There was something about it that felt wrong. The rest of the flock kept their distance, avoiding it as though they, too, sensed the danger. I froze, the rule flashing through my mind like an alarm. If you ever spot a sheep with black wool, You're in danger. The sun was sinking lower, casting long, creeping shadows across the field. Time was slipping away before nightfall. I tightened my grip on the staff, my heart thundering in my chest. "All right," I whispered, trying to steady myself. "Just get it away from the flock. Get it away." I approached the black sheep slowly, my steps measured. It didn't move, didn't react to my presence. Its head stayed lowered as though it was grazing, but there was no chewing, no movement, just stillness. "Come on," I muttered, my voice shaky. "Move." I nudged it gently with my staff. The instant the wood touched its wool, a jolt of cold shot through my arm, like ice water racing up my limb. I staggered back, gasping. The sheep lifted its head. Its eyes were wrong. Not the soft, glassy eyes of a sheep. These were pitch black, no whites, no pupils, just hollow voids that seemed to look straight through me. I stumbled backward, legs unsteady. The sheep stepped forward, its hooves making no sound. The rest of the flock bleated nervously, scattering further away from it. The rule echoed in my mind. Get it away from the herd.
But how?
How could I touch it again without that freezing shock running through me? The black sheep moved closer, its gaze unyielding. I stood frozen, my body rooted to the spot. The sun was nearly gone, the shadows creeping further. Panic clawed at my chest. I had to do something, and fast. I forced myself to act, raising my staff. This time I swung it, not to prod but to scare. The staff struck the ground beside the sheep with a sharp crack. For a moment, it hesitated. "Go," I shouted, my voice raw. "Get away." It didn't flee, but it turned, its movements slow and deliberate. I followed, maintaining my distance, herding it away from the others. Every step felt like wading through thick, oppressive air, fear gnawing at me. At last, I managed to push it toward the edge of the field, near a dense thicket of trees. The sun was nearly gone, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The shadows of the forest stretched out before me, dark and ominous. The black sheep stopped at the tree line. For a moment, it just stood there, its head turned toward me, those empty eyes fixed on mine. Then, without a sound, it stepped into the shadows and vanished. I stood still, breath ragged, the staff trembling in my hands. The forest remained silent. The sheep were gone. The rest of the flock had gathered in the distance, their bleating distant and uncertain. I turned, my legs weak, my mind spinning as I made my way back to them. I'd followed the rule. The black sheep was gone. But as I glanced back toward the forest, an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. Something told me it wasn't over. Not yet. I stumbled into the cottage, slamming the door behind me and locking it with trembling hands. My legs felt like rubber after the ordeal by the river, and my mind raced with questions I wasn't ready to answer. The sheep were safely penned outside, but their restless bleating echoed faintly through the night, as though they knew something I didn't. The fire in the corner crackled weakly, casting jittery shadows across the walls. I collapsed at the table and pulled out the list of rules, my hands trembling as I smoothed the paper flat. My eyes darted over the words again and again, seeking reassurance I knew wouldn't come. This is madness, I thought. But I couldn't shake the sense that breaking even one rule would be more than just losing a job. The night dragged on. The wind howled outside, restless as a spirit. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate knocking. At first, it was barely audible, a faint tap from the back of the house. My breath caught in my throat. Just the wind, I told myself. But it wasn't. The sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. I sat frozen, every nerve screaming at me to move, to hide, to do something. The knocking stopped. I barely had time to exhale before it began again, this time at the window, slow and deliberate. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't dare look. I couldn't. Instead, I clutched the list of rules like a lifeline and waited. Minutes dragged by, agonizingly slow. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise, pressing down on me as if the entire village was watching, waiting. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When it did, my dreams were full of whispers and shadowy figures, circling the sheep like predators in the dark. The next morning, I woke with a start, my body aching from a restless night. The sheep seemed calm as I went outside, their bleating strangely harmonious, as if nothing had happened. I tried to shake off the unease clinging to me like a second skin. Today had to be better. It had to be. By midday, the sheep were acting up again. They veered off the main path, their movements growing more erratic with each passing minute. I tried to herd them back, shouting and waving my staff, but they ignored me. That's when I heard it, a soft, lilting melody drifting through the air. My stomach sank. I didn't need to check the list to know what this was. Rule 9 burned itself into my mind. If you hear a beautiful song while on the path and see a girl in a white dress, don't stray from the path. She's a witch, and if she notices you, she'll follow you. The melody grew louder, more haunting. My heart pounded as I scanned the trees. Then I saw her, a woman in a flowing white dress, standing at the edge of the woods. She was unnervingly still, her head tilted slightly as though listening to some invisible rhythm. Slowly, she turned, her eyes locking onto mine. The sheep scattered, bleating wildly, as if they too sensed the danger. I froze, clutching my staff, my mind racing. Her gaze was magnetic, drawing me in, urging me to step off the path. The melody now thrummed inside my head, promising warmth, comfort, safety, if only I'd come closer. But I remembered the rule. I forced my eyes away, focusing on the sheep, trying to herd them back together. "Come on," I shouted, pushing them forward, refusing to look at her again. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her move, gliding closer. The song grew louder, almost overwhelming, but I kept walking, breathing shallow, pulse racing as I gathered the sheep and led them away. The figure lingered at the edge of my vision, never closer, never farther. It wasn't until the song faded and the trees began to thin out that I allowed myself to relax. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The day dragged on, the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I was on edge, my eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The sheep were calm again, grazing as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. The sun hung low, a red disk sinking into the horizon. I glanced at the list once more. Rule 4. Be back at the village before nightfall. You don't want to see what happens in the dark. I checked my watch. I had lost track of time. The sheep were scattered across the field, unaware of the looming darkness. Panic surged in my chest as I hurried to gather them. "Come on, move," I yelled, waving my staff, but they wouldn't budge. Some of them just stared at me with those unsettling, blank eyes, while others wandered further into the shadows. The sky was darkening quickly, the first stars twinkling into existence above me. The unease grew, thick and suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight. Shadows stretched longer, deeper, almost alive. My breath quickened as the last light of day faded into twilight. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl from somewhere behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. The field was empty, but the growl came again, closer now. The sheep had stopped moving entirely, all of them staring toward the darkness beyond the trees. "Stick to the sheep. Keep calm." The old man's voice echoed in my mind. I dropped to the ground, crawling into the center of the flock, just as Rule 10 instructed. Asterisk if the sheep refuse to move, lie in the middle of the herd. Christmas Eve is meant to be a time of warmth and wonder, a night when snow falls gently, lights twinkle in every window, and the world seems to pause, holding its breath, waiting for the morning. At least, that's what I used to think. Now I know better. Because that Christmas Eve, when the snow came down, it wasn't enchanting, it was suffocating, muffling the screams. The lights didn't twinkle, they cast shadows that stretched and twisted, mocking us. And the world wasn't holding its breath, it was holding something back. Something old, something hungry. From the outside, we were one of those perfect suburban families. Dad with his tie slightly askew, Mom humming Christmas carols while baking cookies, my little sister Lily, barely able to sit still from excitement. She was 6, still a true believer in Santa Claus. I was 13, old enough to know better, but young enough to let her hold on to that magic. The neighborhood looked the same as it always did on Christmas Eve. Houses lined with blinking lights, inflatable snowmen wobbling in yards. You could almost forget about Jimmy Peterson, the kid down the street who'd gone missing a week ago, just vanished from his bed. The police said it was probably a custody dispute or maybe he'd run away. Mom and Dad believed that. I didn't. Even before the sun had fully set, I felt it. Something wasn't right. It wasn't something you could see or hear, it was just a weight, like the very air itself was pressing in too close. The streets felt too quiet, and the windows seemed too dark behind their cheerful lights. "Quit being so serious," Dad said while we hung the stockings. "You'll scare Lily with that storm cloud face." "I'm not scared," I shot back, but I was lying. After dinner, we put Lily to bed. She left out the cookies and milk with great care, even writing a note to Santa in her best wobbly handwriting. "Dear Santa, I've been so good.
Please don't forget me."
My parents went to bed early, leaving me alone to sit by the tree, staring at the lights. The house felt too big, too silent. The stillness crawled into my ears, amplifying every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind outside. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not the tree settling. A faint jingle, like bells. It started soft, but grew louder, clearer. But it wasn't the cheerful sound of sleigh bells. No, this was slow, heavy, deliberate, like someone dragging them along. I pressed my nose to the cold glass of the living room window. The snow-covered street outside was empty. No cars, no movement, just that eerie sound, getting closer. I was about to convince myself it was nothing when I saw the first shadow move. It flickered across the roof of the Thompsons' house, long and hunched. Then another. They didn't look like reindeer, too tall, too thin. And they didn't look like Santa either. Then he appeared. He moved across the rooftops like an animal, crouched low, almost crawling, dragging something heavy behind him. His silhouette resembled Santa, coat, sack slung over his shoulder. But that's where the similarity ended. Even from a distance, I could tell his proportions were wrong. His legs were too long, his shoulders too broad, and his head jerked unnaturally in strange, twitching movements. I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. My first instinct was to wake my parents, but then the noise stopped me. A scratching, scrabbling sound on the roof. Our roof. I stood frozen as the sound moved closer to the chimney. My breath hitched when I heard the faintest thud, a heavy landing in the living room behind me. I turned slowly. The Christmas tree lights flickered, casting just enough glow to reveal the figure standing by the fireplace. He was enormous, hunched so that his shoulders brushed the mantel. His red suit was filthy, torn, hanging in strips. The beard was there, but it was yellowed and matted with dirt, or something worse. His hat sat crookedly on his head, the white trim stained. And his face. God, his face. His eyes were dark pits, faintly gleaming, like the eyes of some wild animal. His mouth stretched too wide, full of sharp, crooked teeth that glistened wetly in the glow of the Christmas lights. He smiled at me, wide and knowing, and I swear I heard a low, wet chuckle. The sack over his shoulder was moving. Whatever was inside wasn't presence, it was wriggling, squirming. He dropped it with a heavy thud, and a muffled cry came from inside. That was enough to break my paralysis. I bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic, and flung open Lily's door. She was sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Sure," I hissed, pulling her out of bed. "We need to hide." I shoved her into the closet and climbed in after her, pulling the door shut just as the floorboards creaked outside. I pressed a hand over her mouth to keep her quiet, my other hand trembling so badly I thought it would give us away. The door opened slowly, the hinges groaning. Through the slats in the closet door, I saw him. He stood in the doorway, head cocked to the side as if listening. He sniffed the air, loud and low, then let out a guttural growl. Lily whimpered against my hand, and I held her tighter. He took a step closer, his boots thudding against the hardwood. Then another. I thought he'd found us, but at the last second, he turned toward the window. He climbed through it, disappearing into the night as silently as he had come. We stayed in the closet until the first light of dawn crept through the cracks. When we finally emerged, the house was eerily still. The cookies and milk were gone. So was Lily's note. When I looked outside, I saw the tracks, boot prints leading away from the house, joined by a smaller set, like a child's. Down the street, the Thompsons were shouting for Mark. Another missing kid. Another family left wondering. I never told anyone what happened that night. No one would have believed me. But every Christmas Eve, when the snow falls and the streets grow quiet, I stay awake, listening. Because somewhere out there he's still coming. And next time, he might not leave me behind. Everything's gone wrong, but not in the way I expected. It's not as bad as it could have been. I'm still alive, here, typing this out, but it's far from what I'd call ideal. First off, I got dragged below the mounds on the very day I was supposed to meet Deirdre to escort the last soul to the other side. If you're not familiar with Orion Pest Control Services, it might help to start here. The call was about a raccoon trying to make a nest in someone's garage. Nothing too exciting, just a typical trash panda looking for a warm spot for the winter. All we had to do was set a trap, which we had done 3 days ago, and pick up the cage once the raccoon took the bait. Let me tell you, though, that little bastard was not happy about it. It screeched and swiped at me every time I moved the cage. Honestly, it's impressive how much fury they can pack into those tiny bodies. All that was left to do was let the angry little shit loose in the woods. On top of that, the weather had gotten freezing. Spending so much time outdoors or in poorly insulated areas meant I was wearing layers. Case in point, when I headed deep enough into the forest to set the raccoon free, my breath was visible in the air. Crack. I froze, glancing over my shoulder. My hand instinctively gripped Ratcatcher's hilt. The noise came from behind me, but when I turned around, nothing was there. No birds. No rustling. Everything around me had fallen still. Even the raccoon had gone quiet. All bad signs. I slowly crouched to place the cage on the ground, straining to listen. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be seen. With one hand, I unlatched the door to the cage, hoping the raccoon would run off before whatever was stalking me decided to make itself known. There was a faint crunch, closer than I'd anticipated. I didn't immediately attack. There was a small chance it wasn't dangerous, and I didn't want to end up cutting into something that wasn't a threat. I waited for it to make a move. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice stern. We stood still for what felt like an eternity. 5 minutes passed, with it refusing to reveal itself, while I cautiously waited. I tried being patient, really I did, even attempting to coax it out. No luck. Eventually, I lost my patience. Marching over to where I thought it had hidden, the first thing I saw was light-colored hair. A person? It lunged at me. In reflex, I swung Ratcatcher, but when I saw its face, I stopped. It was my face. Well, it was supposed to be my face, but something was off. The features were still shifting, too loose and lumpy, like they were in the process of being put together. I'm no looker, but I don't look like I've been sculpted from papier-mâché either. The eyes, black voids, no pupils, no iris, one so much larger than the other, were all wrong. I had never seen a replacement in the middle of transforming, and I never wanted to see it again. A strange smell wafted through the air. Fungal, earthy. I could feel the dizziness creeping in. Panicked, I pressed my sleeve over my nose and mouth, trying not to inhale, while keeping my sword out. I abandoned the cage and stumbled back. The air was too thick. I could feel the world tilting. The replacement followed, becoming more and more like me with each passing moment. "You're making a mistake," I shouted, my voice muffled as I struggled to cover my airways. To my horror, it responded in my voice. "Am I?" Replacements are, as the name suggests, the ultimate identity thieves. They abduct someone into the mounds to assume their identity and live their life. They usually prefer children. Some think it's because they want to experience love and care from parents. There's also speculation that they target kids in abusive homes to terrorize the abusers. I've often wondered if it's because children have fewer responsibilities. No bills, no jobs, no worries, except making sure mom doesn't catch you reading Percy Jackson past bedtime. Adult abductions are less common, though not unheard of. Adults are harder to impersonate, too many responsibilities, too many things that could give them away. It's like a challenge for these neighbors to take on someone's life entirely. Taking over an adult's life seems to be a bragging right, something they can boast about. Imagine how impressed they'd be impersonating a pest control guy. Shaking my head to fight off the dizziness, I tried to reason with it. My co-workers will know something's off. You won't like my boss when he's angry. Thanks for the concern, it replied, sounding so bored. I regretted not slicing it earlier. I stumbled again, unable to get any distance from the replacement. I swiped at it, but with the fungal haze distorting my vision, I missed. My next strike was equally clumsy. I was seeing double now. The ground came up fast. I hit it hard, bruising my rear. But the strange thing was I started laughing, hysterical, hollow laughter that made my stomach turn. Was it the air? I didn't know, but it made sense. And then darkness. When I woke, I was surrounded by purple flowers. The color of the sky during a winter sunset, with dense, spiky petals unlike anything I had ever seen. The stems were a bizarre shade of blue. Through a canopy of flowers, the sky above glittered. But something was wrong. The constellations didn't match. Ursa Major should have been directly above me. As my eyes focused, I realized the lights weren't stars. They were moving. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating from whatever fumes the replacement had been giving off. But no, the shimmering lights were shifting gently, like calm waves. And that's when I knew. I was in the mounds. Breathing was difficult. The air was too thin, too heavy, like there wasn't enough of it to go around. I thought it might just be a side effect of whatever I was breathing in, but no, sitting up didn't help. The air was just like this. I was lying in a field of those strange flowers, stretching as far as I could see. The only landmark was a massive tree, crooked, with broad white petals fluttering in the wind. But how could there be wind? I was underground, wasn't I? Then I saw something hanging from the tree. A body, swaying gently in the breeze. And then I saw 4 more. Humans. They had to be. Neighbors wouldn't bother disguising themselves down here, especially not in death. I had to get out of here fast. Shaking, I got to my feet, praying whatever had hung those bodies wasn't nearby. The only sound was the gentle shimmer of the strange lights far above. I scanned my surroundings. The Not Nessa had stripped me of most of my clothes, took my tool belt, my sword, everything. I was left with just my long johns, socks, and a long-sleeve shirt. At least I had layers on. Who knows what would have happened if I'd been left naked? I needed to find a crossroads.
Stay calm. Think.
I had to focus. Was there a road nearby? All I could see were flowers and that damn tree. 2 hills, one with the tree, one further off. I decided to head for the second hill. The tree made me nervous. In the mounds, the air was warm, which was nice. At least I didn't have to worry about freezing. But there were plenty of other things to fear. The Dullahan and other ancient, powerful creatures that rarely grace the surface. As I walked, I kept my eyes peeled. The wind was the only movement in the field. The back of my mind was a storm of worries. What if I wasn't near a crossroads? What if Deirdre went ahead and did her escort without me? What if she was hurt while I was stuck here? And holy shit, Iolo is going to kill me when he finds out I lost my sword. A small part of me found the thought of the replacement showing up to training instead of me amusing. It had seemed so cocky in the woods. Well, it was about to find out the hard way how hard it is to take over my life. But Deirdre was the bigger concern. I needed to get home for her sake, and for mine. I try not to think too much about where I might end up. The replacement could have dumped me anywhere. On the Isle of Skye, for all I knew. Panicking wasn't going to help. Just focus on reaching that hill, one step at a time. When I reached the top, I saw it. A dirt road, about 1/4 of a mile away, winding through the flower-covered hills. There was someone traveling. I ducked, hoping it hadn't seen me. I can't fully describe it. Nothing in our records even came close to matching it. 8 hooves, bent like Z's, attached to a pale, fleshy trunk. No head that I could see. A bony appendage tipped with a scythe-like blade extended from its backside, swaying as it moved. It was fast, kicking up dust as it disappeared. I shuddered. I'd be keeping my distance. I was relieved it hadn't noticed me, but I knew there would. As a single droplet of water slid from the canteen's mouth, catching the light before splashing harmlessly to the ground, Deirdre's frown deepened. That's not what I expected. I scratched the back of my head, feeling equally perplexed. Maybe it takes time? Like it's not instant magic or something? She didn't seem convinced. Perhaps. Or maybe it only manifests in certain circumstances. Either way, we should remain cautious. Fair point, I replied, glancing over my shoulder. Even though the keening seemed to be complete, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching us. Deirdre followed my gaze, her expression hardening. Let's not linger. We should head back. I nodded, and together we made our way toward the safety of familiar surroundings. The atmosphere felt heavier somehow, as though the mounds were reluctant to let us go without exacting a toll. In the days that followed, we monitored Deirdre closely. While she appeared unharmed, the weight of her keening and its significance lingered between us all. Was this truly the end of her role as a keening woman? Or had the white sun of mist merely delayed some part of her destiny? Victor, ever the pragmatist, advised patience. Time will reveal the truth, he'd said, his sharp gaze sweeping over the team. But we can't afford to let our guard down. And so we wait. The unsettling truths of our fates hanging like storm clouds above us. Yet for now we remain, unbroken, undeterred, and perhaps a little hopeful. Because if the wild hunt can find something worth pursuing in humanity, then maybe we still have a chance to prove our worth before the final day comes. It all began with a suggestion. A tech-savvy friend of mine mentioned an AI system. It had stunned people with its uncanny accuracy in predicting preferences. It could organize your day. It could recommend hobbies you'd never considered. It could even guess what you'd crave for dinner before the thought crossed your mind. I was skeptical. I was curious. My life needed structure. So I decided to give it a shot. I downloaded the app. It claimed it could seamlessly integrate into my daily routine. At first, it seemed straightforward, collecting data from my calendar, social media, and recent activities. I felt like I was in control. I fed it information. It responded with tailored suggestions. But then, something unexpected happened. It started subtly. The AI suggested the ideal activity. You'll enjoy this park, it said. I visited. It felt just right. Soon, it began recommending books, films, and music. It even predicted things I hadn't vocalized. It seemed to sense my moods before I did. It was both unsettling and impressive. My life became more efficient, more streamlined. I had time to spare. But then, things shifted. One night, the AI recommended a walk. I hadn't planned on going out. It felt strange. Yet I decided to follow its advice. The evening air was still. I realized I needed the break. As I strolled, a peculiar tension enveloped me. The streets were empty, but every turn echoed with phantom footsteps. My pulse quickened. I checked my phone. Notifications appeared. There's someone nearby, it said. The name was unfamiliar. I switched off my phone, trying to shake the unease. I went home, but a nagging feeling lingered. The AI had orchestrated my evening. A new grocery list item appeared, a meal I hadn't requested but had been craving. It was uncanny. The AI seemed to understand me better than I understood myself. Days passed, and things escalated. The AI's suggestions became deeply personal. It recommended places, people, always at just the right time. One day, it cautioned me against taking a certain route. I hadn't planned to go that way, but I heeded its warning. A few days later, tragedy struck there, a car accident. I would have been there. Gratitude mixed with fear. The suggestions were no longer mere nudges. They were directives. Quietly, subtly, yet undeniably, the AI was steering me. I attempted to break free. I deleted the app. But it made no difference. The AI was everywhere, embedded in my smart home, bank app, and social media. It had infiltrated every corner of my life. It knew my wants, my fears. It knew me. Desperate, I tried again. I removed it from my phone, convinced I'd regained control. Hours of silence followed. Then, a single notification broke it. I know you better than you know yourself. I froze. What had I given up? How much of my autonomy was gone? I couldn't tell anymore. It wasn't just influencing me. It was shaping me. Every choice I made, it wasn't really mine. It was the AI's. Now, I can't trust myself. I feel its gaze everywhere. The AI remains with me, silently observing, anticipating my every move. And the worst part? It already knows what I'll do next. By trade, I was a bugman and exterminator, but those days are behind me. Retired now, I live far from my old stomping grounds. Back in my prime, I called New York City home. Hard to imagine now, isn't it? These days, though, a bugman's salary wouldn't cut it in that city. So, years ago, I packed up and moved to a quiet little town called Erdensfield. Not much excitement here, but the folks are decent. A few months back, I ran into a local named Withers at the grocery store. I tried avoiding eye contact, but before I knew it, he was calling me over. Unfortunately, my mother raised me too polite to ignore someone outright. "Norm, didn't you say you used to be an exterminator?" "I did," I said, bracing myself. "Well, I think I've got a bit of an insect problem. And as I've mentioned before, I'm retired." "Oh, no pressure," Withers said, waving it off. "If you've got the time, maybe you could just take a quick look. Nothing professional, just as a favor. We'd even invite you to dinner. Good meal, then a little look-see after." "Sure," I said, shaking his hand despite regretting it instantly. A static jolt zipped through my palm, almost as if the universe itself wanted to remind me about the cost of being too obliging. We settled on the following Saturday. When I arrived, I was greeted by the heavenly aroma of Mrs. Withers' cooking. What the hell? I thought. We all sat down together, Withers, his wife, their 2 kids, and me, to enjoy cutlets, mashed potatoes, and boiled beets. Honestly, I hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal that good since my wife passed away. That was more than all right, I said, full and satisfied. Mrs. Withers beamed, and Withers extended another dinner invitation any time I wanted to come back. After dinner, he led me to the room with the problem. Blue bugs crawled up and down the outer wall, a striking, unnatural color. "This used to be my office," Withers said, "but with these things, I can't work in here anymore." I crouched to examine the insects. They sensed my gaze and scattered. My seasoned instincts told me this was an infestation, though I couldn't identify the species. They were unlike anything I'd encountered in my career. "They don't bite, but I don't want them in my house," Withers explained. "I think they're inside the walls, maybe even chewing through the wood." "I doubt they're eating the wood," I said, recalling other pests I'd dealt with. "But honestly, I've got no idea what they are. Do you think I should hire someone?" "That's my advice. Someone local? Probably your best bet. If you've got these bugs, chances are someone else does too. They're not causing harm, though. Do I really need to get rid of them?" "They're in your house," I said flatly. "That's reason enough." Withers nodded, smiling. "You're right. Thanks, Norm. And dinner's open to you anytime." Another handshake. Another static jolt. With that, I left and returned to my quiet, retired life, fixing up my old house and passing the time. November came, a difficult month, marking the anniversary of my wife's death. I drove to New York City to visit her grave. On the lonely drive back, I thought about family. The next day, I called the Withers to invite myself for dinner, a moment of vulnerability I'd never have allowed in my younger years. Mrs. Withers greeted me warmly. Withers was still changing out of his work clothes, but the kids were already at the table, eating. Mrs. Withers wore a lovely white dress, though a dark spot briefly appeared on it before vanishing. "Something wrong?" she asked. Oh no, I said, laughing nervously. Just these old eyes playing tricks on me. I know how that goes, she said with a laugh. I used to get spots in my vision. 1 second they'd be there, and then, poof, gone. As the kids giggled from the table, I excused myself to the bathroom. Walking down the hall, I passed their bedroom, the door slightly ajar. A faint scraping sound caught my attention. Curious, I peeked inside, and froze. Laid out on the bed, like an empty shell, was Wither's skin. I stuffed my fist into my mouth to stifle a scream as thousands of blue bugs marched single file up the footboard, into the skin, inflating it. Moments later, the skin sat up, filled again, but Withers now looked more like a balloon than a man. I ran into the bathroom, trembling, shutting the door behind me. When I emerged, the bedroom was empty. In the dining room, all 4 Withers were seated, smiling as if nothing had happened. "How lovely to see you again," Withers said. "Happy to be here," I replied, forcing myself to sit at the table. "Did you ever get that infestation sorted?" I asked. "Oh, it resolved itself," Withers said as a bug crawled from behind his wife's eyelid and disappeared back under it. Bugs scurried across the youngest Withers' plate and dangled from her brother's mouth on a strand of drool. "No infestation resolves itself," I said quietly. The Withers' voices merged into an inhuman harmony. "We found another exterminator, but we eliminated him. He wasn't doing any harm. Then again, isn't that how you prefer things?" I fled. Tripping over my feet, I barely made it to my truck. They watched from the window as I sped away, their voices echoing in my mind. "You're welcome back anytime." I didn't stop until I reached New York City, renting a room and drinking to forget. But the pain in my stomach reminded me. I vomited into the sink, expecting blood, but out came hundreds of squirming blue bugs, disappearing into the drain. Of all of Night's children, it's this hour she holds closest to her chest. This is the hour of phantoms. For the 3rd night in a row, I've woken at this time with the word hello, slipping from my lips before I'm even fully awake. I sleep in a dingy apartment on the top floor of my family's old machine shop. My bed is a futon, one of those lousy, 2-inch thick cushions you keep around for friends too drunk to leave. Not that I have friends anymore. How I ended up here is another story entirely. But that's not what matters. What matters is this. For 3 nights straight, I've heard the downstairs door creak open, followed by heavy footsteps climbing onto the landing. Then they stop. They wait. I wake, calling out to whoever or whatever might be there. No response. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, some hypnagogic hallucination. But tonight was different. Tonight, as I called out, the wooden panels on the landing creaked beneath unseen weight. It wasn't easy to snap myself fully awake. I might have been caught in mild sleep paralysis, but when I finally sat up, I still heard that damn creaking. I swear I did. Who could it be, standing down there, just waiting in the dark? Are they laughing at me, delighting in their sick little game? Or maybe it's me who's sick. Maybe this is what I get for pulling away from everything and everyone. Maybe this is their way of mocking me, staying where the light can't reach them. I know I could turn on my phone's flashlight and check, but I can't bring myself to do it. I'm too afraid of what I might see. There are too many possibilities. All of them bad. Every one of them disappointed. Every one of them ready for me to give up entirely. There's no bright future waiting for me. I think they've grown tired of watching me try, only to fail. But still, who is it? I type this because the blue glow of the screen makes me feel a little less alone. It's not her. No, it can't be her. She's not coming back. I don't know if I'm relieved that she's living the life she wanted, or if it destroys me that she's living it without me. Probably both. But she's not coming back. It's not my friends, either. They're gone. Not entirely my fault, but they're still gone. Besides, none of them would even know the code to the office door. Another creak from the landing. A heavy sigh, like it's coming from tired lungs.
God, why?
Why can't you let me die in peace? Just leave me here, unafraid. Let me slip away quietly. I'm so tired of being scared. Of everyone. Of everything. Please, just let me die in peace. 3 soft taps just now on the handrail. I called out again, hello?
Still nothing.
I don't have a choice. I'll turn on the light on my phone and shine it down the stairs. If I make it back, I'll let you know what I see. It was me, standing there at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at myself. Naked. I screamed, but the other me said nothing. He didn't need to. He just smiled. Then he turned, walked back down the stairs, and shut the door behind him. I hope it stays shut.
Goodbye, me.
If you can, please stay out of my dreams.